The forest was too quiet that morning, unnaturally quiet, as if the wind itself was holding its breath. The old pines stood frozen in the golden dawn, their shadows stretching like long fingers across the cold earth. And in the middle of it all, barefoot and shivering, wandered a little orphan girl named Ilara, clutching the torn sleeve of the only dress she owned. She had been searching for firewood, hoping to warm the abandoned cottage she called home, when she felt the earth tremble beneath her feet. It wasn't an earthquake, not an animal, not anything she had ever felt before. It was a muffled, desperate thumping beneath the soil, 3 slow beats, then silence, then another faint cry for help swallowed by the ground. Ilara froze. Her breath quivered. Then the ground moved again. She realized with growing horror that someone was buried under there. Alive, pushpin. If you believe the world still needs kindness, compassion, and second chances, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Biker's Kindness. It truly helps our channel reach more hearts. Ilara had known fear her entire short life. She had lost her parents in an accident when she was 7, and the state placed her in a rural foster home that treated her more like a burden than a child. When she finally ran away, she found refuge in an abandoned hunting cabin deep in the woods. Hunger, cold, loneliness, she fought them all with the quiet strength that only children who have lost everything can possess. But nothing she had endured prepared her for this, the knowledge that someone else's life depended on her next move. She knelt down, pressing her ear to the ground, and heard faint breathing mixed with soil shifting. Her heart raced. She scraped the earth with her bare hands until her fingers bled. Beneath the first layer of dirt she found fabric, then leather, then cold skin. Panic surged through her. Whoever was down there didn't have much time. The body she uncovered belonged to a man wearing a heavy biker vest, patched, worn, and marked with the symbols of a motorcycle brotherhood she didn't recognize. His face was pale, smeared with dirt and blood. He was unconscious, barely breathing. Ilara was small, frail, and exhausted, but her soul was fierce. She kept digging, struggling against roots and rocks, pulling him free inch by inch until his chest rose fully into the air. Only then did she realize how massive he was. Saving him would take more strength than she had. But walking away was not an option. Not for her. Not after everything she had survived. The biker's name, she saw it stitched faintly on the vest, was Maddox. She didn't know if he was good or dangerous, but she knew one thing: someone had buried him alive on purpose. Whoever did it could come back. Ilara's mind raced, her breath visible in the cold morning air. She grabbed a broken branch, lifted Maddox's head, and wiped the dirt from his mouth to let him breathe. When he coughed weakly, it gave her the spark she needed. He was still alive. And as long as he was alive, she would not abandon him. Ilara dragged, pushed, and stumbled, inching Maddox toward the cabin. Each movement felt like carrying a mountain. Her tiny arms trembled under the weight. She slipped more than once, bruising her knees, scraping her palms raw. But she kept going. For a child who had never been protected, saving someone else was the only way she knew to keep her heart whole. She managed to drag him onto the wooden floor of the cabin just as a storm broke over the forest, rain hammering the roof like iron nails. The wind howled through broken windows. She wrapped Maddox in the thin blanket she used for herself and lit the small fire she had been collecting wood for. Then she sat beside him, clutching her knees to her chest, praying silently for a miracle. Hours later, Maddox stirred. His breaths were ragged, uneven, but he was alive. Ilara watched his eyelids flutter open, confusion mixing with fear and pain. He seemed unable to speak, his throat too dry, his mind too foggy. So she brought him water in a cracked jar and sat close enough for him to know he wasn't alone. Beneath the toughness of his inked arms and leather vest, there was a look in his eyes, a look of deep vulnerability she recognized from her own reflection. They were two broken souls, both lost, both fighting to survive in a world that had given them nothing. Over the next few hours, Maddox regained fragments of memory. He remembered being ambushed on a remote road. He remembered masked men, shovels, the suffocating darkness of the earth closing in, and a sound, his own heartbeat fading. But beyond that, everything was a blur. He knew he needed help, real help, and Ilara realized that his life was still in danger. The men who had attacked him might still be hunting him down. Her fear grew, but so did her resolve. She would not let him die. She found Maddox's phone crushed in his vest, but the SIM card was intact. With trembling fingers, she inserted it into her own old, dying prepaid phone she had scavenged months earlier. A single bar of service flickered. She used it to dial the one number listed under brothers. When a rough voice answered, filled with shock and suspicion, she explained everything in as few words as she could manage. The line went silent. Then the voice said only, "Hold on. We're coming." Ilara didn't know what that meant. She didn't know that Maddox belonged to one of the largest biker brotherhoods in the region, a family bound not by blood but by loyalty stronger than steel. She didn't know that Maddox had been investigating the disappearance of a fellow rider when he was attacked by criminals trying to silence him. She only knew she had to protect him until help arrived. A night fell heavy over the forest. The rain softened but the cold grew sharp. Ilara sat beside Maddox, feeding him sips of water, wiping his forehead with the corner of her dress, and tending the fire. Every rustle outside made her flinch. Every howl of wind rattled her bones. But she stayed awake, watching over him the way she wished someone had watched over her. In the dim firelight, Maddox whispered a single rough word of gratitude before drifting back into sleep. She didn't respond. She didn't know how to. But her eyes softened, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel completely alone. Not by dawn, a distant rumble shook the ground. Ilara stepped outside, heart pounding. At first she thought it was thunder, but thunder didn't roar in rhythm. Thunder didn't grow louder in waves. Thunder didn't glow with headlights cutting through the fog. Hundreds of motorcycles emerged from the forest road, forming a river of chrome and steel. Then hundreds more. The roar echoed through the mountains like a storm made of engines in fury. Ilara stood frozen at the cabin door as nearly 7,000 riders filled the clearing. Patches, leather, heavy boots, and determined faces carving through the morning mist. What she didn't know was that word had spread like wildfire through the biker networks overnight. Maddox was loved. Respected. And when one child's voice reported he had been found buried alive, the entire brotherhood mobilized with a speed and force that left the authorities stunned. They had tracked Maddox's GPS tag, traced the call, and now surrounded the cabin in an unbreakable wall of protection. The sight of such sheer power, thousands of riders forming a human shield around one small, rundown cabin, would be remembered for decades. Their leader stepped forward, lifting his helmet, revealing eyes that softened instantly when he saw the tiny girl standing guard over their injured brother. The men approached slowly, afraid to scare her. But Ilara didn't flinch. She only pointed toward the cabin, showing them where Maddox lay. The leader nodded deeply, a gesture of respect far greater than any medal. Paramedics among the group rushed inside, stabilizing Maddox. The riders stood in silence as Ilara watched from the doorway. In that moment, the leader made a decision that would soon shake the entire region. As Maddox was carried to safety, the massive convoy of bikers lined up across the highway leading out of the forest. Thousands of engines ignited at once, forming a blockade that spanned miles. The message was simple: until the men who tried to murder Maddox were found, no one would enter or leave the area. Their brother had been wronged, and justice would not wait. Drivers miles away were stunned to see every highway entrance guarded by a wall of motorcycles. News crews rushed to capture the historic stand, and in the center of it all, sitting on the leader's bike wrapped in a biker's jacket far too big for her, was Ilara, the little orphan girl who had saved one of their OWN. By the time authorities arrived, the bikers had already found clues, tracked tire marks, and located the abandoned vehicle belonging to the attackers. Maddox regained enough strength to identify the men. Within hours, the culprits were in custody. Justice was swift and undeniable. When Maddox was finally transported to the hospital, he refused to let anyone else carry Ilara. She rode beside him, clutching his vest as if it were a lifeline. And in many ways, it was. The bikers stayed outside the hospital through the night, keeping their engines quiet, waiting for news. When Maddox finally opened his eyes, the first thing he asked was whether the girl was safe. She was. But she had nowhere to go. The leader approached her gently, kneeling to meet her eyes, and told her something that made her small face crumble into relieved tears. Maddox wanted to thank her properly when he recovered. The Brotherhood wanted to protect her. And if she agreed, they wanted to give her something she had never had before. A home. A family. A life where she would never be abandoned again. For the first time since losing her parents, Ilara felt warmth spread through her chest, warmth stronger than fear, stronger than loneliness. She wasn't just an orphan girl from the woods anymore. She was part of a family of thousands, a family forged in loyalty, courage, and gratitude. Maddox eventually recovered fully, and he never stopped telling people the truth. that he owed his life to a little girl with bleeding hands and a heart far bigger than the world ever gave her credit for. The Brotherhood honored her in their own way, engraving her name on their memorial wall, giving her a vest custom made for her size, and promising that no matter where she went, she would never walk alone again. Pushpin, if this story touched your heart, please like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment for Biker's kindness. It truly keeps these stories alive. The sparkles before this story ends, please drop a comment saying, kindness still matters. It helps more than you know, and it shows the world that compassion is still alive.